300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field. The last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on a jam-packed Monday morning, going to unravel everything that took place last night, and that's where I have to start with the NBA Eastern Conference Finals, Game 7, Boston, Miami. These two teams have faced off against each other so many times over the last several years in this exact position in the Eastern Conference Finals with a trip to the finals on the line. This time it was Boston that prevailed. They held on barely in the final couple of seconds of Game 7 to win 100-96. So here's the interesting thing about this series. The first 5 games of the series really weren't that intriguing or that competitive at all. Right. Jimmy Butler took over in Game 1. Boston responded after Butler dropped 41 in the opener to take Game 2, a blowout. Game 3 was one of the only few close games that we had in the first 5 games of the series, but still a couple key quarters is what pushed Miami and Boston to blowout wins. Game 4 was obviously a blowout for the Celtics. Game 5 was a little bit closer, but Boston still dominated. They won by 13. So the first 5 games of the series, you can argue 3 of those games ended up becoming blowouts, and they were all decided by huge quarter eruptions, individual quarter eruptions. Only one of the games in the first 5 games of the series was actually competitive, and that was Game 3. And Jimmy Butler didn't play in the second half of that game, dealing with his knee inflammation. And then Game 6 and Game 7 occurred, and they were absolutely fantastic. They were absolutely what you hope for, what you fantasize and crave at this stage of the year. And then it culminated with just an all-time Game 7 performance, from narratives, from storylines, from just the way that these guys competed. It's everything you could have hoped for. It's what we as NBA fans absolutely salivate for in a Game 7. You want high emotion. You want high intensity. You want absolute competitiveness. Every guy leaving it out there, them looking absolutely exasperated and exhausted on the court, and that didn't disappoint. All those things were the case. But here's the interesting thing about Game 7, and in particular Game 7 in this series. It's not always, and it's not often, that Game 7 perfectly encapsulates a series, because of the peculiar nature of a Game 7, because of the fact that it's win or go home, because of the fact that it's a do or die game. We see this in March Madness all the time, how sometimes these one and done situations, they don't always produce the result that we're expecting, because of the nature of it's a single elimination game. And in Game 7s of the NBA playoffs, they don't always, again, result the way that we expect them to. And they don't always embody what a series is and how a series can be defined. But in this particular case, this Game 7 yesterday perfectly, perfectly encapsulated what this series was about. This was a perfect snapshot, a perfect microcosm of this series between the Celtics and the Heat. The Boston Celtics, a much more talented Boston Celtics team, jumping out to an early lead, an incredible start in this game 7, facing a feisty, undermanned, under-talented Miami Heat team, and yet through sheer will and determination, the Heat kept chipping away, and had an opportunity for a go-ahead shot with 16 seconds left by Jimmy Butler. The Celtics led. Obviously, they jumped out to that quick 20-7 start. They led by 12 with 5 minutes to go. They led by 13 with 3.5. They led by 10 with 2 minutes. And they led by 7 with 1 minute remaining. And yet Jimmy Butler still had a go-ahead three with 16 seconds left. And he missed it. But the fact that Miami was even in that position to begin with speaks to that competitiveness, speaks to that intensity and that relentless mindset, that refusal to cave, that refusal to acquiesce under the bright lights. It was absolutely spectacular. And here's the interesting thing. I love Jimmy Butler. He was a one-man wrecking crew, not only throughout the series, but especially the last couple games. And in Game 7 in particular, he played all 48 minutes, wasn't given any breaks, no respites for him, drops 35, and obviously he had just dropped 47 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists in that epic Game 6 performance on the road in Boston at TD Garden. But initially, he was the only one that showed up for the Miami Heat. Bam Adebayo ended up contributing in a big way with 25 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists. But beyond those two, and really beyond Jimmy Butler's 18 points in the second quarter, the Heat really weren't given many opportunities, and they didn't receive many contributions from those ancillary parts. Kyle Lowry, I know he ended up dropping 15 points, but he shot it terribly. It was 4 for 12, 1 for 6 from the three-point line. Max Strus didn't really start cooking till the second half, and that's including the 3 that got overturned. He ended up finishing with 8 points. And by the way, on that 3, I don't think it was definitive that the back of his heel hit the sideline. And even if you think that it did, the fact that the refs went to review it 4 or 5 minutes later, I think totally changed the complexion of that moment. Because the Heat kept thinking they're within 7, they're within 8, they're within 9 points, and instead it's ballooned back to 13. And that was, again, the story every single time. The Boston Celtics were dominating almost every aspect of this game. And every time the Heat managed to pull within single digits, the Celtics just continued to inflate the balloon a little bit more. And the lead kept getting pushed a little bit bigger to 12, to 13, to 14. Of course, they led by as many as 17 in the first half. But going back to Jimmy Butler, obviously this is a guy who had put Miami in this position, not only with his Game 6 heroics, but even Game 7. You could see he was absolutely exasperated. And he pulls up for 3, down 98-96. And I can't fault him for it. We can't really criticize him for that shot attempt because of everything that he had devoted and poured into this game, into this series, and what he's meant to Miami. You have to live and die with your best player taking that type of shot, making that decision. Of course, in 2020 hindsight, could he potentially have driven it past Al Horford? Potentially. But in that moment, you have to ultimately decide what you think is best. And Jimmy Butler felt like, you know what, I didn't want to go into overtime. He wanted to win it on his home floor. The arena absolutely would have erupted. It obviously looked low, but it looked on target initially when he shot it. And I think it was a good shot for him. You really can't criticize him. But again, outside of his heroics and what Bam provided you, Kyle Lowry, Max Strus, little sprinkles Down the stretch, Oladipo had a nice little stretch of 9 points, but you didn't get any production from PJ Tucker. Tyler Hero, your sixth man of the year, averaging 21 points per game. He really couldn't go. He played 5 minutes in the first half, gave you nothing. You didn't get anything from Gabe Vincent. So really from top to bottom, you had two guys that kept the Heat afloat in the first half. Really one guy who then inspired Bam, who couldn't quite rub the rest of the pixie dust onto the other guys, and that was the game. But again, every single step of the way, Boston was just dominating. The Heat, you could just tell how laboring it was to try to get off a shot. It was either Jimmy Butler's creating and he's going to shoot for himself, or Kyle Lowry is playing in the pick and roll with Bam. That was their offense. Because if they don't get some of those offensive rebounds, the Heat aren't even in this game. That's how good Boston was defensively, preventing easy looks around the rim. But the offensive rebounds gave some of those shooters some looks. And then you combine that, it's compounded by the fact that the Heat were abysmal from three. 6 for 30 from the three-point line. Boston nearly doubled that mark, 11 for 32 for the C's. And again, yet, in spite of all that poor shooting, they're still in that position. Again, it's quite remarkable how that even occurred, and that's where we finish is with Marcus Smart, because at this point in the game, 5 minutes left, the Celtics are firmly in control of this game. And Marcus Smart, listen, you have to take the good with the bad with Marcus Smart. You love his energy, you love his confidence and what he means to the Celtics, especially defensively, defensive player of the year. But he makes some boneheaded plays, and some of his decision-making late in games just baffles me. The fact that he took the final 5 shots of the game for the Celtics, the only other shot was an offensive foul committed by Jaylen Brown when he elbowed Bam in the face up 98-93 under a minute to go. But outside of that, the 5 official shots down the stretch were all taken by Marcus Smart, and he missed them all. So if you're Jason Tatum, if you're Jaylen Brown, if you're Ime Udoka, you're going to have to sit down and probably talk with Marcus Smart for the finals. Like, hey, man, I know Tatum is getting doubled down the stretch of games, but you can't be the one taking all these shots. But needless to say, as much as it kind of pains me to admit this because I'm a Lakers fan, I do think, though, the Celtics were very deserving of punching their ticket to the NBA Finals. There is no way to say that this Celtics team didn't deserve to be in the NBA Finals. I think that you look at the path that they took the path of most resistance. They went through hell and back. They had to play into the fire. They dismantled, obviously, the Nets, KD, Kyrie, and 4. They went through Giannis and the reigning defending champion Milwaukee Bucks, albeit without Chris Middleton, who I do think if he was playing likely would have pushed the Bucks past the Celtics. But the Bucks were fortunate with the injury bug last year. You need sometimes to have those breaks. The Celtics had a lucky injury break against the Bucks. They took advantage, and now they dismantled the Heat in 7 games. They just wore down Miami over the course of 2 weeks, and now they're in the NBA Finals. And I just think that a lot of these guys on the Celtics are very likable. It's hard not to like this team. Jason Tatum is a very humble superstar, very classy move to pay homage to Kobe, wearing his armband. Jaylen Brown, I think, shows a lot of humility. He has great composure. He's kind of he kind of plays with a blue collar, grab your lunch pail and go to work type of mentality, despite the fact that he is a star in this league. You've got Marcus Smart, who's gritty, who's tenacious, who plays elite defense. Al Horford's a likable guy. Derek White is a likable guy. And then Ime Udoka, I just love his demeanor, and he does kind of have this aura about him as a coach. Even immediately after they won Game 7, his speech was pretty candid, and he didn't really allow for much room to celebrate Game 7 and lose sight of the NBA Finals, which is the next step. And I just love the way that he continues to challenge his team. And so this is not a cocky Boston Celtics team at all, which I think you really have to respect. And they've truly been tested. They have faced a lot of adversity, not only in this series, they won game 6 on the road in Milwaukee, but over the last several seasons, they've experienced heartbreak. Jason Tatum's obviously been to the Eastern Conference Finals 2 other times, lost both other times. Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart, this is their fourth trip to the Eastern Conference Finals, but they had lost their first 3. And finally, they were able to break through. So big congratulations to them. It was a tremendous, tremendous final couple games of the series, but they were very much deserving. And I think that the fact that they've managed to endure all those hardships and now finally break through, I think it's hardened them. And now it sets up an incredible matchup in the NBA Finals. So cannot wait for that. And speaking of the NBA Finals, I do want to preview this year's NBA Finals just a touch. Boston Celtics obviously punched their ticket to the NBA Finals last night. The Golden State Warriors in San Francisco, they solidified their spot in the NBA Finals several days earlier, dismantling the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games. So now it sets up a really fascinating matchup between two teams, the Celtics and the Warriors, that have actually provided a lot of intriguing regular season matchups over the past several years. In fact, obviously this year, both teams split both games, each team winning on the opposing team's home floor. The Warriors beat the Celtics 111-107 at TD Garden earlier in the year. And then the Celtics returned the favor, winning 110-88 in San Francisco at the Chase Center. Now, the only difference in that second go round was Marcus Smart ended up falling on Steph Curry's ankle or leg, and it ended up hurting and injuring Steph Curry. It sidelined him for the final 2 to 3 weeks of the regular season, which is obviously adding some fuel to this juicy matchup here. But the Boston Celtics have actually beaten the Warriors 5 out of their last 6 times over the last 3 seasons. Now, again, the Warriors have been dealing with a bevy of injuries sustained to Klay Thompson. They haven't played the Celtics many times with Klay Thompson. Steph Curry's been hurt or in and out of the lineup several times. So that is the one caveat. But the Celtics have had the highest winning percentage against the Warriors since Steve Kerr took over as the head coach in the 2015 and 2016 season. And that's what's impressive, because they're 9-7 against the Warriors. They have the highest winning percentage. No other team has managed to win at that type of clip. So I just think from a fascination standpoint, this is a very compelling matchup, because you've got some of that tension between Curry and Marcus Smart. You've got the fact that the Celtics have had such a strong record against the Warriors. And then you look at some of the narratives surrounding these two teams and how they arrived to this point. The Boston Celtics, you go back to January when they lost to the Portland Trailblazers. They dropped to 23-24. They were below 500. They're just on the outskirts of the playoff picture. And they finished off their season going 28-7 over their final 35 games. They were the best team in the NBA since that loss to Portland. And now they're in the NBA playoffs. And I think that the Warriors haven't gotten enough credit as well. I do think that while the Phoenix Suns were taking over the West, people were forgetting that the Warriors were actually keeping pace with the Suns until their litany of injuries kind of derailed them and set them back a couple slots. And that's when Memphis ascended. And people kind of forgot the Warriors had an incredible regular season as well. When you win over 55 games in the regular season, that is a tremendous season as well. So it's only fitting that these would be the two teams that would be facing off in the finals. And what's compelling about them is not only are these the two best defensive teams in the A, but most importantly, They're the two most versatile teams in the NBA. When you are an NBA franchise, you hope to construct a roster like the Golden State Warriors and the Boston Celtics. That's how they're very similar in those respects. They draft extremely well. They built these teams from the ground up. Well, when you look at the Warriors and what's defined them, it's been their small ball, right? Their ability to switch every single position, their depth lineup. Now the iteration of it includes Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Jonathan Kuminga, Gary Payton II. Obviously, Steph and Poole are in the lineup, but those aren't elite defenders. Now, the first iteration of it was the most formidable when you had Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, a healthy young Klay Thompson, Andre Iguodala, Harrison Barnes, and then eventually got upgraded to KD surrounding Steph. But the interesting thing is the Celtics, you can argue, are just as versatile. Because when you look at the Celtics roster, they've got height, they've got length, especially at the wings positions along the perimeter with Tatum, with Brown, with Derek White, with Marcus Smart, with Al Horford, with Grant Williams. They can switch every single position. And even though Rob Williams isn't necessarily laterally the quickest 7-footer on the perimeter, he can still hang with some of those wings along the perimeter. But more importantly, he provides that defensive anchor in the middle. And that's the difference. The Warriors, this is a situation where, as serviceable and productive as Kevon Looney is, and he brings a whole lot, packs a big punch for the Warriors, this is a situation where you'd love to have a James Wiseman in the lineup who could potentially offset whatever it is that Rob Williams can present, because that's the only area that the Warriors can kind of be exposed is in the middle, in the interior, just a little bit. So, but these teams are very similar in how they're constructed. And I don't think that the Celtics are going to be necessarily fazed by this finals stage because of all the battles they've had to go through. But with that being said, the fact of the matter is, they're not nearly as tested in the finals as this core group is for Golden State. And that's why ultimately I'm leaning towards the Warriors in this series. But I'm paying Boston the ultimate compliment by saying that I do think it's going to go the distance. I do think it will go 7 games because I think Boston, for whatever reason, has a proclivity to play better on the road than they do at home. And I think that just when it looks like Golden State might be pulling away in this series, Boston may come up with a huge road win. I mean, they won 3 of their 4 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Celtics won at FTX Arena. So their ability to win on the road, I think, is huge. Coach Udoka has given them the moniker Road Warriors. That's ironic given the team that they're facing right now. So I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any stretch. These two teams absolutely fit perfectly. They match up perfectly with one another, especially if you're a Celtics fan. You match up against the Warriors extremely well. Every single position, again, they can switch everything. They play with a tremendous amount of physicality. You can throw a lot of bodies at Steph, at Jordan Poole, at Klay Thompson. And then you look at some of the inner matchups, which I think is just as compelling because you've got obviously the little bit of tension between Marcus Smart and Steph Curry. Marcus Smart injuring Steph Curry for the final 2 to 3 weeks of the regular season. You've got Marcus Smart and Draymond Green battling for who is the quote-unquote legitimate defensive player of the year. You know, Draymond Green is going to have a lot to say about that. So I just think both sides have incredible narratives attached to their rivals to the NBA Finals. Obviously, the Warriors returning to the NBA Finals for the 6th time in 8 seasons. That's only been done by 2 other teams, the Bulls and the Lakers. The fact that here you have a team that had experienced such ecstasy, and in a matter of moments, all of a sudden, it turned into devastation and just cratering to rock bottom. You miss the postseason completely over the last 2 seasons, and then they've risen from the ashes and are back in the NBA Finals. And then on the flip side, the Boston Celtics, that core of Tatum, of Brown, of Smart, finally breaking through. A storied franchise like the Celtics, who were tied with the Lakers for the most NBA titles with 17. They're back on this stage. You have a lot of likable guys. Al Horford reaching the NBA Finals for the first time. So this is just an incredible matchup in the NBA Finals. I think this is one that NBA fans have kind of fantasized for several years, and now it's finally coming to fruition. And I cannot wait to get it started. Cannot wait for the series to get started on Thursday. Okay, so I want to transition now to the French Open. This has been a tremendous, tremendous French Open. In fact, this was the first time since Wimbledon in 2011 where the top 12 seeds of a Grand Slam all advanced to at least the third round of the Grand Slam tournament. Now, obviously, we are wrapping up the fourth round, heading into the quarterfinals, which will begin on Wednesday. And this is where we have one of the juiciest matchups you could hope for as a tennis fan. Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic set to face off in the quarterfinals. This is just pure tennis euphoria. This is just everything that you want as a tennis fan. Two gargantuan ambassadors of the sport, tennis legends, two of arguably the greatest of all time. Certain people lean in the direction of Djokovic, others Nadal, others Federer. Regardless, they talk about a Mount Rushmore of tennis players. Just imagine wiping off one of the faces and just keeping three guys' faces on the Mount Rushmore, and these two are on it. Just two absolute legends, and also bitter rivals matching up in a later stage of a Grand Slam. It's everything you want. The only shame about this matchup is it's coming in the quarterfinals as opposed to the semifinals or the finals. That's what you would really want if you are a tennis fan. But needless to say, you look at the accolades from both of these two guys. Again, we don't have to go through the list every single time we talk about them, but Nadal with 21 Grand Slams, of course, Novak Djokovic with 20. Nadal set the men's record at the Australian Open. That's, of course, a tournament Djokovic couldn't play in because he is not fully vaccinated or vaccinated at all. So Nadal is in this great position here. He's obviously the king of clay. He's won this tournament at Roland Garros 13 times, and he's got this pantheon great Novak Djokovic in his path, waiting. And what's amazing about these two guys, again, is not only are they just behemoths of the sport, but they are the ultimate anchors. And again, you include Federer in this group as well. They're the ultimate anchors and torchbearers of the sport. They are the ultimate missionaries of tennis. They promote the game, they represent the game, and they play the game at an extremely consistently high level. And obviously there's always significance when these two players are facing off. But what's amazing about it is some of the backstory and the context heading into a matchup like this. You look at a guy like Nadal and what he's had to labor through, especially recently, the fact that he's battling a chronic foot injury. He sustained a rib fracture not too long ago. And the emotional toll of just his last match in the fourth round. He's playing this incredible up-and-coming Canadian, Felix Auger-Aliassime, ranked number 9 in the world, up-and-coming 21-year-old Canadian kid who is coached by Rafael Nadal's uncle, Tony Nadal. In fact, Tony Nadal was Rafael Nadal's first legitimate coach on the tour. He I shouldn't say led, but he was coaching Nadal through his first 16 Grand Slams on the tour, then decided to take a break to head Rafa's tennis academy in Mallorca. And now he's returned back to the tour to teach this up-and-coming stud. And so you've got that context just surrounding and engulfing Rafael Nadal heading into a matchup like this. And now, obviously, Nadal is coached by former world number 1 Carlos Moya. And this was just the third time in Rafael Nadal's career that he went to 5 sets. He went to 5 sets against uh, Ajwaf Alasim in the fourth round. And what was amazing was the night before that fourth round matchup, he actually was watching the Champions League final between his beloved Real Madrid and Liverpool, and he didn't return to his hotel until after midnight the night before he's supposed to play a fourth round match at Roland Garros, which ultimately lasted 4.5 hours. So it's some incredible context. Then you also have the fact that Novak Djokovic is the reigning French Open winner. He defeated Rafael Nadal in the semifinals last year in 4 sets. In fact, Nadal took the first set. Djokovic rattled off 3 straight to win that semifinal matchup and set up what was an incredible comeback, down 2 sets to none to Tsitsipas. So it was just a wild and bizarre tournament. And obviously last year Nadal was dealing with that chronic foot injury, and I think that his matchup against Djokovic actually exacerbated it and derailed him the rest of the season. It sidelined him for the rest of the season. And so you have this potential for revenge in 2022. And for Nadal, he's been the most dominant player ever on clay. And at this tournament in particular, he is 109-3. That's his record at the French Open. 109 wins and 3 losses at Roland Garros. 2 of the 3 losses have come against Novak Djokovic. The 2 seasons that Novak Djokovic won the French Open, 2016 and 2021. So this is going to be their 59th meeting, which is more than any other 2 men have faced off against each other in tennis's professional sports era. In the era of the sport, no 2 men have ever faced off more than Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic. Djokovic leads the all-time series 30-28 overall, but Nadal holds an advantage at Roland Garros, up 7-2 in the advantage department. So again, it's always going to be a fascinating matchup. These 2 teams are, I keep saying teams, these camps, I guess, if you want to think about it in teams terms, but individuals are just the ultimate champions of the sport. And I like the fact that both of them have a couple days to rest and to gear up. Obviously, Nadal has endured a much more grueling route to get to this point, a lot more taxing. Djokovic hasn't been on the court nearly as long as Nadal has during this run, but sets up what should be just a fantastic matchup. Okay, final topic, my Malkin's moments. I have some great Malkin's moments for you. I first have to start by paying some respect to the Boston Celtics returning to the NBA Finals for the first time since 2010. Now, I get to take a little dig because in 2010, that's when the Lakers defeated the Celtics in 7 games. That is one of my favorite memories as a Lakers and LA sports fan. But regardless, you have to give the Boston Celtics a lot of credit. They battled through a grueling and exhaustive 7-game series against the Miami Heat. They just won last night 100-96. Obviously, they went through the Brooklyn Nets. They dismantled the Nets in 4 games, took down the defending champion Milwaukee Bucks in 7. Now the Heat are the latest victims in 7 games. And again, the last time the Celtics won a title was in 2008. It came, unfortunately, against the Lakers in 6 games, but it feels like it's been a while. The Celtics have had to fully reboot past that Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, Rajon Rondo era with Tony Allen and Kendrick Perkins. And now this is a completely new look of the Celtics that are returning to the NBA Finals. Major shout out to them. And I have to give a shout out to Jimmy Butler of the Miami Heat, especially for the performance he had, not only last night in Game 7, but in Game 6 in particular. Dropped 47 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists in the Heat's Game 6 win on the road at TD Garden to tie the series at 3-3, a game that the Heat won 111-103. They managed to prevail because of Jimmy Butler's heroics. But here's the impressive thing. So that stat line was the third time this postseason that Jimmy Butler recorded a game in which he scored over 40 points and only committed 1 or 0 turnovers in a game. He became just the second player to put up that type of stat line in a postseason series. The only other guy to do it was Kobe Bryant, who did it in 2009. And obviously, Kobe ended up leading the Lakers to, at the time, it was their 15th NBA title, his first title as a Laker without Shaquille O'Neal. They defeated the Orlando Magic in 5 games, and now Jimmy Butler managed to do that. He scored a playoff career high. That was a playoff career high for him with 47 points in that Game 6 victory, and it was his 4th 40-point game of this postseason, which is the 4th most in Miami Heat history. He had a stellar series. It's a shame he was playing through that hobbled knee, that knee inflammation, but shout out to Jimmy Butler. He was absolutely sensational throughout the postseason. Big shout out to Ime Udoka, who became just the 5th first-year head coach in the NBA to lead his team to an NBA Finals. We've seen in the last 25 years. We've seen David Blatt did it with the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2015, Steve Kerr with the Warriors in 2015, Tyronn Lue with the Cavs in 2016. Obviously, David Blatt was canned and Ty Lue was inserted as the next head coach. That's when the Cavaliers ultimately came back to stun the Warriors after trailing 3-1 in the NBA Finals. Major shout out to Tyronn Lue. Big shout out to Nick Nurse, who did it in 2019 with the Toronto Raptors, and now Ime Udoka joins that exclusive club in 2022, leading the Celtics to the NBA Finals in his first year at the helm. And finally, have to give shout out to Denny Hamlin, who held off Kyle Busch in overtime Sunday night to win the longest Coca-Cola 600 ever in the history of the race. It lasted 5.5 hours, 413 laps. It's NASCAR's longest race, and it took, again, over 5.5 hours to complete. There were 18 caution flags. 16 drivers failed to finish the race altogether. The race featured a 12-car wreck. There was all kinds of wreckage going around, and yet Hamlin still managed to prevail. He won for the 48th time in NASCAR Cup Series. So shout out to him. That's all the time that I got for today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe, J-O, with Jonah Malkin on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Jonah_Malkin or at morning_Joe_JMalk97 on Instagram, and Jonah Malkin on TikTok. Thank you so much. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.